Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another thrilling episode of Prose Notes, a graduate writing podcast. I'm Samantha.
And I'm Nolan, and we got real goofy energy at the top of the episode.
I didn't have it about 10 minutes ago, and now all of a sudden we're there, which is totally fine. That'll be some good vibes for this episode. On this episode, we are going to be talking about the period of time in grad school that many call comprehensive exam. Comps for short.
Yeah.
I'm sure we are going to be calling it comps the whole time.
For the most, yeah.
So hopefully that hard P at the end translates. Before we get started with the actual episode, just a couple of announcements. We have 2 more episodes to record this semester. Mm-hmm. We've got one of our lit review episodes where we will be talking about the hegemony of the English language and kind of how, academia is structured.
Relationship to academic English and all of those wonderful things.
Yeah, it's going to be a beefy one. I'm excited.
Super excited for that beef Revan episode.
Yeah, we'll have a guest host, Alex Cran, on for that one.
Friend from the Writing Center.
Absolutely. And then our final episode will be another interview to kind of close up the term. So we're very excited about the rest of the semester, about the other episodes. Before we get into comps, Nolan, many departments have some sort of reading list or, texts that you need to prepare in order to take your comprehensive exams. For our GAF, for our goof or our GAF, what would you add to that list that's like fun? That's fun stuff. That but still informs your thinking.
It's hard for me to think of this one, in part because being in a Department of Education, it's tougher to justify bringing in like literary things. I guess my number one thing off the top of my head, is this podcast?
Whoa.
I so bad. I'm like, this is my scholarship. Let me quote my, reference my own podcast. Damn it.
Are you gonna do that? Are you gonna reference your own podcast?
I think I could reasonably or justifiably cite a lit review episode.
Whoa.
Because that is
incredible.
That's essentially what's happening. Ones like these, perhaps a bit harder to justify, but would that I could, because I do think this is a form of scholarship.
Hot take for the day.
other pieces of media, and these are just ones I think that influence how I think about the world and who I want to be. Probably Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Okay.
I don't dabble in sci-fi a whole lot, in tabletop games or reading or anything like that. It's not a genre I explore, but one thing I always tell myself is I'm trying to build the Star Trek world. I want to do things to get there because God, I want to live in it. It's so much better than the world we have now. The other one, and this is maybe more appropriate for the lit review episode, but is Avatar: The Last Airbender. I just think the resistance and the dealing with revolutionary ideas and resistance and really heavy topics. And I watched it as a kid, and I think I was able to internalize a lot of the positive messages. So Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series, no comment on the Netflix version, or the M. Night movie. Really, really good, and it was really foundational to my childhood. And then maybe the last one is just Elden Ring. And
Amazing.
If you've ever played a Souls-like game, but especially an open world one like Elden Ring, I think that's what grad school feels like. You're just plopped down in Limgrave. There's a big old dude on a horse, and he will get you.
One sustained note in the background.
And if you go too far, you end up in Caelid, and there's dogs and there's birds. And if that's a spoiler for you, what are you doing? You should have played this game by now.
God, everyone's vomiting on me.
Yeah, it's so.
Yeah.
This, the getting dropped into that world that just everything wants to get you feels very relatable.
Yeah.
What about you, though?
That's
resident English.
No, I love this. So I don't think I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I've talked to people about it when I talk about my research. And for those of you who don't know, my research is in Shakespeare, but specifically in representations of minor characters. And would you believe that all of the anime that
it's a big list of anime
I consumed as a child would have influenced the way that I think about narrative structure and minor characters and their importance on our understanding of the world that we're watching. So kind of very first one was probably Fullmetal Alchemist, because Fullmetal Alchemist had these really interesting homunculus characters representing the 7 deadly sins. And I was reading Paradise Lost at the time, and I went, Whoa, John Milton.
How old were you at the time of this?
I mean, I was a junior in high school,
so it's not
like maybe not
9-year-old
kid.
Samantha.
Yeah, not like 9-year-old Samantha, but like, teenage Samantha was learning these things and realizing these things. The other anime on the list would have, call back to Naruto, one of my kind of first and very dear loves of my life. Naruto was such an interesting anime for me because you had all of these, you had the three main, Naruto, Sakura, Sasuke, and then you had all these other teams. And sometimes you got some episodes with like Team 11 or Team 10. But what I found very liberating about these characters were that they were still kind of blank slates for fans and for the narrative speaking. So, I started thinking about what does Kiba do on his days off? These were things that I was thinking about as a kid, and maybe that translated into some fan fiction. Maybe it didn't. Who knows? I won't tell. The other kind of big anime in this list for me is One Piece, which I will acknowledge is a newer addition to this list. I only started watching One Piece about a year ago.
And you've gotten through that many episodes in a year.
Yeah, I've been binging it. But what I think is wonderful about One Piece, and I think why I like it so much, is it is a anime that explicitly wants you to think about other people in the world as being equal or as important as our protagonists. Luffy's amazing, very powerful. The whole crew, they are unto gods in their own rights, but they go to islands and whatever is happening on that island is the most important thing in the world.
Right.
They care about those people and their plight, and they want to help them, and they put aside most of their own grievances in order to help this community. And I think it's an incredibly complex way of thinking about protagonism. What is the purpose of a protagonist? Is it to just learn about a person or follow the story of this thing? Or is it to use their agency and influence to help others? And I really, really think One Piece is playing around with with a lot of these ideas, because Luffy's ultimate goal is to be the king of pirates, but he wants to do that so he can basically be peace. I'm out of here. He wants to do it to become totally free, to be totally free of society and its expectations. And it's a really, really interesting he doesn't want to rule, he doesn't want to control, he just wants to do this thing so that he can be it. Yeah. Anyway.
But it's just cool, and I think it's a topic that came up when we were kind of preparing the notes for this, of in the ones that you talked about, it felt very apparent that when the characters weren't on screen, they had their own, they have their own lives. They're not just in a box for the creator to use when it's appropriate. And I think that's just a fun bit of world building. And we could spend a whole long time talking about that, and that's a different podcast.
No. The one other thing on this list, which is Shakespeare related, is the phenomenal musical Something Rotten. And the only reason I do want to mention this is because I think Shakespeare admiration or fetishism has gone too far. And I think Something Rotten is a very fun way of saying it's fictional, but there were other people writing at the time of Shakespeare.
It's not just the bard.
It's not just him. Other people were producing plays. He was probably being inspired by other people. And Something Rotten is just a really fun kind of exploration of that.
I think I'll have to add that one on my list because I haven't.
It's wonderful. It's a delightful musical. Do you like musicals?
Oh, yeah.
Hell yeah.
One of my favorites. Les Mis, up there. Wicked, up there.
Whoa, yeah. Hell yeah.
I saw the SpongeBob musical on Broadway while I was in New York on my way to Ireland. It was a thing that exists.
Oh, no.
The performers were also talented, and I grew up watching SpongeBob and love SpongeBob, and it's just I'm not convinced it's a thing that I needed.
Not everything has to be a musical, and that's fine. I saw the Steve Jobs opera. Whoa. There's a Steve Jobs opera. It's a thing that exists.
There are multiple things
that exist. Including comprehensive exams.
Including comps. There we go. There's the segue. That's the improv skills.
So, just for a little bit of context, I think this episode's going to be fun because I've gone through comprehensive exams.
And I'm still scared of them.
Excellent. So, we're going to be kind of talking, I think, around the experiences of it in terms of preparations for comprehensive exams. The other thing that we should acknowledge is both of us have a kind of singular understanding of our field and what comps are going to look like in our field.
So English and education, respectively.
We have friends and colleagues who are in other departments and other fields who have talked to us about their comps experiences. So we're going to be kind of sharing those secondhand. But I think my particular goal for this episode is to kind of give our listeners a sense of how you can take agency in this process and that it doesn't have to feel like the biggest, scariest exam of your entire life.
Yeah, and I think, how do I want to phrase this? Not a return to basics for this episode, but right, like when we conceived the idea of this, of like demystifying graduate school and explaining like processes and ways to kind of help navigate. It's essentially a coaching episode of sorts while having that discussion, and I'm really excited to have it because it's gonna be really helpful for me.
Oh, Nolan, is this just a coaching appointment for you? So how do you understand comprehensive exams?
So when I think of like comps in general, I think of, there's a written component and an oral component where you write. And again, this is largely informed by what my friends have told me versus what I know of my department. So you write, and what you might write looks different from department to department. And then you have to go for like 2 hours or so, give an oral defense of kind of your writing. And so, it's done usually at the end of coursework, so roughly at the end of year 3. That seems to be pretty standard for when people are getting done with coursework. In this case, everyone I know is a PhD student. I actually don't know what the EDD students do for their comps. I think they have to do them. I'm almost positive they do, but I guess I can only speak to the PhD side of things.
Absolutely. So there's kind of these 3 different stages or layers to, I think, most comprehensive exams. There's going to be your kind of reading list or the
preparation period.
Yeah, the preparation period. There's going to be the written portion. For some students, like it sounds like in your department, that's going to be those like 3 papers that you need to prepare. Are they each 20 pages?
Well, and so that's just kind of, I don't know that there's a specific page requirement per se, but to kind of then cue you in further into what the ALPS department has, as far as I understand, I'll get 3 questions and I'll have, I think, around a week and a half. It's essentially a couple days on each of them. And you write anywhere from probably 18 to 25 pages on them. So, it's essentially 3 term papers on a particular topic.
Yeah. And then there's the oral portion or the kind of presentation portion.
Yeah.
So that aligns with my experiences kind of more or less. So I had a very long reading list. The kind of goal in my department was literally 100 things on your reading list. And that was something that we did.
That's so many.
It's so many. But, some of it was like,
how much was skimmed?
A lot was skimmed. Very, very much was skimmed, and we can kind of talk about why. But a lot was skimmed. A lot of it was like articles that I selected. So those were, they range anywhere from like 20 to 60 pages. Some of them were entire books. I had a lot of primary sources.
Like in every play by
Yes, I did read. I did read every single play by Shakespeare and a bunch of other plays by Middleton, Marlowe. And who's the other guy? Don't worry about it. So I was kind of covering a survey of like Renaissance lit. There were some other texts on that list that I quote unquote prepared, but I had already read in my coursework.
Right.
So Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen was on there, but I had read that before. Paradise Lost was on there, but I had read that before.
In high school.
In high school. Well, no, also like throughout all of undergrad. So, a lot of these texts were really on there because they were my focus. They were helping me in a direction that I wanted to go for my dissertation, but I hadn't necessarily started planning out my dissertation project yet. So one of the very productive early conversations I had with my advisor, and this whole process, I will say my advisor was wonderful. I think she was very explicit about what she was expecting from me throughout the comprehensive exam process. She was very generous with that advice that I think some grad students don't get, of like, she was one of the people that said, don't read everything. You don't have to. And I said, really? And
Are you sure?
And she said, yes, Samantha, don't worry about it. In her very fun, like, ant energy way. But she was very explicit about what I needed to do, which I think was very helpful throughout this entire process. So we sat down and she said, this is not your dissertation proposal, but the goal of this list is to start getting you thinking about that. So she wanted me to pick things for my list that I was interested in, that I think, would be a productive way to take the dissertation. And that was how I approached the reading list specifically, was, what are the things that I want to start learning about or thinking about with regard to these early modern texts. At the time of my reading list, I thought I was going to be examining, it changed a lot, but I thought I was going to be examining like representations of personifications, or what I was calling broken personifications, over early modern English lit. So that was going to include Milton. Well, he's Restoration, but like long early modern. So Milton, Shakespeare, Spencer. Like, I thought I was going to be doing a lot. And by midway through that summer of my reading, that topic had narrowed down very drastically. And it was becoming much more interested. I was becoming much more interested in anonymity and specifically minor characters. So these functional, like, servants and messengers that I was reading about and learning about in my primary text, and that was informing the, like, secondary source stuff that I was reading. So in terms of your reading list, because I don't want this to just be the whole story. So in terms of your reading list, what are you starting to think about, and like what might be an approach for you as you start to look forward to those comps?
It's an interesting question. And so I think it'll be a lot like you, like the articles, the book chapters, the what have you from like relevant classes and coursework that I've taken, I think will most assuredly be on my list. In the department, there's this, it's just called Education 800. It's kind of education as a field of scholarship, and it's like a survey of different topics in educational lit just in general. So like tons of like sociology of education articles. I'm sure I'll include like DiMaggio and Powell's Max Weber Revisited talks about isomorphism, which I've got an article in the works that you already know about, like just such a foundational piece of like organizational sociology. So I'll bring that in and I'll reread it, but like it's those kinds of things. Or North's like idea of a writing center, like these kinds of things too, because I'm now interested in writing center scholarship. So I think it'll be a lot like you, where there will be, and I think it probably will be that conversation between like, what do I need to know? Because the messaging I've received, perhaps to take a step back, right, is also for me supposed to help me prepare for my dissertation. I think there will still be some question that might be generally related to broader topics in educational leadership and policy studies. But still, the goal is to make it applicable, to begin kind of the lit review part of like a dissertation proposal, as I understand it. So like the goal is to get you on my comps committee and my dissertation committee. So like you being able to ask a question about writing center studies, that's, I think, part of the plan. Probably one about higher education and higher education policy in general. And then the third one, that's a great question. I guess I'll talk to my advisor and see what that's about. So I think my process will probably be a lot like yours. Like, what are the foundational things as I hone my idea of what the dissertation proposal will likely be? Because the goal for me is to come right out of comps into dissertation proposal kind of within a couple weeks of each other.
Take a break.
To
Why
really
would you do that?
refine those things because time is everything and I only have so many credits paid for.
Okay, that's fair, but like take a little bit of a break.
I'm sure there will be a little bit of downtime, but yeah.
You will have read like 100 things. Your brain's gonna be like, I need to.
But thank God I'll have most of a summer, kind of like you. I'll have a summer to prepare these things, and then the goal is to take comps like in August or September, and then launch into proposal by that winter.
I think for a lot of departments, the comprehensive exams exist in this kind of liminal period or liminal expectation of they should be comprehensive over your field or specifically your subfield. I think that's actually where students struggle because the idea is like, how am I going to get tested on everything? What kind of exam will it be if I have to be able to answer questions about all of the scholarship? And I think what the reading list is actually supposed to help you do is narrow down the like corner of scholarship that you're actually going to be focusing on. There's too much to read out there. Things are published constantly. You're not going to read everything in your field. You are going to read the highlights. And from the highlights, I think most departments want you to start thinking about what you have to say about those things. So when I'm talking to students about that, like transition from the reading list to your answers or to the questions that you're going to be answering for your written portion, I'm trying to get them to think about what insights they want to bring to those conversations. So not designing questions that you think your advisors want to ask, but designing questions that you feel like is going to give you the ability to speak intelligently about your topic or your ideas about all of the things that you just read.
Well, and it's an interesting point you bring up because, like, I'm still like, everything's interesting to me, you know, and I have decided now on this field of like writing center scholarship and kind of higher ed, like policy, like very institutionally minded. And so, you know, coming in, like, even a year ago, I'd have been like, there's like 3 or 4 things that I think I could imagine myself doing. And it doesn't mean I can't get to them later, but like, I want to do my dissertation on this topic. I want to start my academic career being an expert in these things, right? And that's the whole point of a PhD, right? You become an expert in some super niche thing. And having that framing, even just in the discussions for preparing for this episode and right now, like, helps align my purpose or whatever, you know, highfalutin word I want to use. Like, it feels like I can direct my energy better maybe with something like that in mind.
If you have a bunch of ideas, if there's still kind of a couple of topics you want to explore, the comps could be a space for you to get those questions so that you can kind of start thinking about a couple of different topics. Like, I think there's value in thinking about the comps as a way to start preparing for what may be a dissertation proposal. It doesn't have to be like that. So if you have kind of one of our friends in the writing center has been preparing his comprehensive exam list, and you know he's in Rec Comp, so he has like 3 specific lists.
Like, it's like 3 different domains.
And you know, I think that's a lot of work, but what that allows him to do is say there are kind of 3 different angles of us as a scholar that I can kind of explore. So you can have, you know, you could start to explore the 3 different versions of what scholarship might look like for you in the future. If that seems stressful, of you're like, oh wow, I'm, you know, starting to nail down who I am as a person, it's fine. Like, nobody's ever going to read this. This is also a document that it's not published. It doesn't exist.
It's department internal.
It's department internal. The only people who are ever going to read this stuff are your faculty members. And it's never like, so if you decide much later in life that, like, if you decide that month that you don't want to really be a scholar who's interested in X, you don't ever have to write about that again.
No, exactly. Like, and like, scholarship changes all the time. And so, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I think as I'm kind of preparing for them here in the next year, it's like, okay, I'm going to kind of hopefully use this to survey a narrow field. To hopefully get like that dissertation proposal topic. I think I think maybe one of the major sources of anxiety, yeah, sure, I think they come programmatically very often at an interesting time where you're transitioning out of the structure of coursework into the relatively free-form dissertation proposal and dissertation process where you're not bound by structure. And so comps is like this big spike. The notes that I wrote down, like it's this black box you like enter into and come out of. But I think kind of tied into that, I think people have some concerns or fears, or I know I've even thought about them, of like the weed out nature of them. Is it a like gotcha? Is it not a gotcha? Because to maybe add some context, I have a friend in a more mathematical, anyways, I'll say program. And so his comps were not at the end of year 3. He's done with his coursework now. They're actually at the end of year 1. And it essentially was, and the professors talked about it kind of in this way of, are you capable of doing the math and applying the relevant theoretical frameworks to be a scholar in this field? So basically you have to pass these, otherwise you're out of the program because you're not good enough to do the work that we're going to ask you to do down the road. And I don't think that's the experience I have. Like, I've talked to my advisor about this, and she's really wonderful. And it's like, no, like, it's not a got you. It's, to use a word, it's about, like, the integrity, right? Are you a capable scholar?
And I do think that a lot of departments use this as the period of time where they kind of figure out if you are ready for a dissertation. I think a lot of faculty members really only experience your work in coursework. And so this is the first opportunity they often see from you that is indicative of like your analytical or critical thinking skills that allows you to start to make inroads into a particular topic. I don't think anyone should treat this as a gotcha moment. My understanding of a lot of faculty members at KU and IU, where I did my PhD, they want you to succeed in these moments, but they also expect you to prepare. I think this is also going back to like the reading list and the idea of reading everything. They want you to prepare all of this material so that you can speak to a new, interesting, nuanced topic that you're developing. Now, you can't reasonably read everything. It is, I mapped it out. I think I had to read like 5 books per week, and that was moving slowly if I wanted to get my reading list done like in the time frame that I had allotted for myself. And when I say 5 books, I mean 5 things on my list. So sometimes that was a full book and a splattering of articles, or 5 full books. And so
English.
There were weeks where, you know, I was pacing my apartment reading every single, like, you know, reading for like 8 hours because I knew I needed to get through these texts in order to like meet my deadline for myself. Granted, I was in a fairly privileged position where I had the time. I was like teaching one class that summer. I had my part-time job at the writing center, but otherwise it was like my time. So I had the time to do so. And yet there were things on that list that I didn't get through all the way. Now, this is also strategy. It doesn't mean that you are a lazy graduate student if you're not reading the entire book or you're not reading the entire article. Part of the agency, I think, of this process and starting to notice patterns and ideas for yourself is acknowledging that maybe some of the things on your list aren't going to be as useful to you as you thought they were going to be. So when you're designing your list, you may put a lot of things on there that you're like, oh, I think this is going to be really important for my scholarship. You start reading it and you're like, actually, this doesn't really, I don't need this. There is a moment where I think graduate students either feel that like cost sunk fallacy of, well, I started reading it, I should finish it. This is an opportunity for you to start getting picky and strategic about your time. You don't have to read that thing. You can check it off and say you looked at it, you skimmed it, You can write a couple of sentences about what it was talking about and why it wasn't useful for you, but don't commit the time. Try not to commit the time to reading the entire thing if it is ultimately not going to be useful for you. Now, you may be thinking, Nolan, Samantha, what the heck? What if I get a question about that text in my exam? Okay. Say you skimmed it and it wasn't useful to you.
For XYZ reasons, this is not relevant.
For XYZ reasons, this wasn't actually as relevant to my scholarship as I think. As I was developing this idea, the oral exam is your opportunity. We may be skipping ahead a little bit, but the oral exam is your opportunity for you to start performing that scholarly identity that your professors want to see from you.
Yeah.
So talk like a scholar. Talk like a professor. Use those rhetorical phrases that enabled you to say, this is useful for the way I'm thinking. And, these scholars over here, while they did have some interesting ideas about XYZ, what they were saying doesn't align with my theoretical framework. Cool.
Yeah.
That's an intelligent way of saying it wasn't useful.
Yes, they just actually, it wasn't great for me. Yeah, and so, I guess two things, but to speak to this one immediately, I think some people in the department, or I felt my own anxiety about the oral exam, about, is that where you're going to get, the gotcha? But I think it, the messaging I've received is all I can speak to. And it is, wanting to see your analytical capabilities. It's the thing I want to see of my students in my classroom of, yes, I care in part about, what you write in the answer to your exams, but I'm so much more interested in your thought processes behind it and how you're making these claims and how you're interpreting these materials. And that's the work of a scholar. And so all of this really, again, aligns with what I've heard, but it's good to hear it from a person who's gone through it, right? It's, as my advisor has told me, for her, write comps were the hardest thing.
Okay.
But not in a scary way, just the rigor, right? Of they're important, and it's a thing where success is the expectation and happens very often.
Yeah.
But you have to respect them and give them their time and, do those things, do the process the right way. And there's lots of right ways I think one can do it, but you have to do them in order to get to that next stage. And it was interesting. We were kind of talking about it of it's not that dissertations aren't stressful. It's just it's spread out over such a long period of time. But this is such a concrete spike at a transitional period in your graduate student career.
The dissertation is a marathon. The comprehensive exams is absolutely a sprint.
But it's like a 400-meter sprint where you are so gassed by the end of it.
You just fall on the floor.
And so, I still have anxiety around it. But I think, and it definitely... And I'm an anxious person. It started, I think, as that negative type of anxiety. I can feel it shifting to that, you stress, that positive stress of, let's get motivated, let's make sure we're doing this right. You can do this, Nolan, but, you have to do it. You just got to be sure you get the work done.
If any of our listeners are preparing for their comprehensive exams and maybe they're stuck in their reading list or, the questions are coming up and those seem daunting, I think there's absolutely value in setting concrete goals for yourself throughout this process so that you feel like you are achieving what you want out of this experience. Your professors probably have a very similar expectation for you. So set the expectation that you want. What do you want to get out of this process? What do you want to learn? And what do you want to be able to demonstrate at the end of this month, few months of your life? My other suggestion, and this was true for me, and I hope that it can be something that anybody going through comps thinks about, is because comprehensive exams are such an internal process, again, nobody else is going to read these answers other than your faculty members. It is not something that's ever published. It's not something that you're presenting on at a conference necessarily. Talk to your cohort. Talk to other graduate students in your department. Pick at that community for the answers that you need. One of the things that I did, and maybe it's just because I'm nosy, but I was starting to get a little frustrated because my advisor was being very supportive about the whole thing, but I was like, everything I've heard from people is like, this is tricky. So I started asking around and just tried to get a pretty good sense of what other graduate students had experienced in their comprehensive exams. And what I learned was a variety of things, that certain faculty members asked these kinds of questions, that other faculty members were really supportive in the room and like really just wanted you to like do well. Some faculty members would not really say anything and you couldn't really rely on them. And
The inscrutable academic.
yeah. And what that helped me to think about was my committee dynamic, what I could probably expect from them in terms of questions. I knew that one of my committee members was probably going to ask me a question about poetry. So I like prepared a little thing about poetry for that. And it gave me it gave me just my little anxious brain a better sense of what I was going to experience in that room, not just what they were going to ask me or test me on, literally what that room would feel like.
Yeah.
So I would highly recommend talking to other graduate students in your department to just pick their brain, buy them a coffee, say like, hey, can you just tell me how your comps went? And get that narrative information, get that like anecdotal information so that you can kind of prepare yourself for the experience of comps. I also had a pizza party the night before my comps because my structure was that we had, it wasn't 3 papers that we had to write. We basically had a 2-hour oral exam with a 20-minute presentation at the beginning. So I got 3 questions, was told to select one to prepare a response to, and that was my 20-minute presentation. They also didn't want it to be a written document. They wanted it to be a presentation. So
Fascinating.
Yeah, so I got a little bit more kind of flexibility with my tone and kind of how I was actually organizing the information. But the night before my exam, had a bunch of friends over from the department. I presented my little answer. They gave me feedback. We ate pizza. It was really helpful because if I had gone into that room having only presented this thing like by myself, I wouldn't have had a good sense of like what worked and what didn't. So getting the feedback on my presentation was really helpful. Now, I know for a lot of students, those written portions are the scariest because they are the most isolated. Tell me a little bit about, are you like stuck in a room? Are you like just told to go write for a week each of the answers?
Yeah, so I guess to kind of speak to multiple things that you talked about. So, I've been having these conversations with my advisor. Part of my story is my first advisor left the department after year 1, so I transitioned to a new advisor at the start of year 2. Well, at the end of year 1, start of year 2. And so, I've been having these questions with her, and so it's been interesting. And this is how I've interpreted how she's handled it. Part of it is I think she's been learning the department specifics of comps, right? There's the general idea of what comps are that I think are pretty stable across departments of education, but then there's how we do them here. So when I was starting to ask her at the end of year 1, what's up with comps, I kind of got let's hold off on that and get to coursework. But now that it's, approaching the end of year 2, starting to think about that in earnest, I can definitely tell, I'm getting more information. I think she has more information. So I've appreciated kind of, I guess, that what I'm interpreting as positive paternalism. So my advisor, if you're listening, I think you're doing a great job. And this is not at all a critique. I feel like I've felt like that kind of guiding hand of you don't need that yet. And then the other thing is, so the information I do know has come from asking people in the department who have gone through comps. I know of 3 people on the UPS PhD side who have gone through it. We have so many EDD students. And just these other 2, they teach the class with me. They're GTAs with me, and I just don't see a ton of other UPS PhD students. The program is kind of rebuilding is maybe not the word, but kind of re-solidifying student presence kind of on campus and in the building. So I've asked the 3 of them. One of them is actually a husband and wife pair, and so it was interesting because they talked about it sounds like you kind of just go into a hobbit hole and kind of write for a week and a
Yeah.
half. And so like it was a thing where the department kind of structured theirs back to back because you can't have mom and dad both doing comps at the same time with young children because then no one would be taking care of the young children.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think we necessarily have to like go into a computer lab or a room on campus and write. Like I think as I understand it, so I could be wrong.
Sure.
But I think, I'll go home and I'll have like 2 to 3 days to write on question 1, and then 2 to 3 days to write on question 2, and then a couple days to write on question 3.
Yeah.
And then I'll turn that in, and then the committee will read it, and then the oral exam should be a few days after that.
For that kind of structure, one of my recommendations is always to think about it as an analytical lit review. So,
and I love lit review. So
yeah, and you are using all of this information that you've been reading. You're taking these ideas and you're starting to organize it in a narrative that's going to be useful for you to think about the development of a particular idea. But again, this is a chance for you to start intervening into the scholarly conversation. What do you have to say about this? What insights can you bring to this conversation? And in those answers, to remember that they care about what you have to say and less about, everything you read. They do care about that, but, what they want to see is, can you start to think like a scholar in your field? There are some departments that have the like you sit in a classroom and write your exam for you write the answer to your question for so many hours. I don't know how common that practice is anymore because I think pedagogically departments are realizing that that's just not how writing works.
Yeah, because like if they're expecting like 20-ish pages, right? I can't do that in just 4 hours.
So I think there's also a shift in departments to make comprehensive exams more integrated into the graduate timeline a little bit and more connected to actually the work that they want you to do as a scholar and a graduate student. So I hope that, students who are in departments with that kind of like the classroom model of the exam, I hope that changes.
The ACT model?
Yeah, I hope that changes for you. If it doesn't, you can always come talk to me and we can kind of develop some strategies for what to do when you get in the room. But I also think that there is a push for comprehensive exams to be smarter for students.
Yeah, and a thing I think I'm reading between the lines of your advice, but I think it's one worth saying is like, I think in talking to these people, I think what you can do is get a sense of the climate of your department. Like my department really, like it feels like a healthy, like I've got friends who describe their department dynamics and I'm like, wow, that sounds like hell, whether it's like intellectual or like even like weird political social competitions. I don't feel that super strongly. Like I think I can put together a committee with like a breadth of people with different, pieces of scholarship and like have that healthy, productive, rigorous, right, but like still productive comps experience. And so I think like in interviewing or just talking with like other students or even your advisor, like I think understanding department dynamics, I think is a big part of it. Sounds like success in these kinds of things, just to realistically prepare yourself for what you can expect.
Yeah. Department dynamics are going to come up anytime you have four or five faculty members in a room. I always hope that they are adults about the whole thing and put you and your needs as a student first. But sometimes you have to tiptoe around those things.
You just got to be a bit realistic about understanding, I think, that situation.
Yeah. Earlier you said that your advisor expressed that their exams were the hardest part for them. I really liked my comps. I think it was because it was the first time that I felt like an independent scholar and not just like a little grad student who was writing papers. My dissertation proposal, which I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point on the podcast, that was rough.
Yeah.
that was the hard one for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because It's weird. Because I don't know that she said it was the scariest, but certainly like just the most intellectually challenging. I think she said that she like kind of like you like enjoyed it like it was the first foray, right? Because I'm just yes, I'm producing term papers and all these things, and I'm preparing an article manuscript and all that wonderful stuff. But like so much of coursework is like you're still like engaging in knowledge, but kind of still receiving knowledge. Like you're not positioned as an expert of relative sorts, but like like this is your first foray to like. What claims do you want to make? Like, who are you as a scholar? And so I think she also appreciated that. And it's what I'm looking forward to. I have, in preparing for these notes, I went on my whole kind of diatribe of what the scope, I think, of my dissertation will be. And it's like, like I have claims to say. I just know I need to get through this comps process. I think to like refine that, right? Like it's the anvil upon which I can like hone the edge of my scholarship.
Yeah, you're standing on the shoulders of giants finally. You're
becoming
up there.
part of the pyramid.
Yeah, the pyramid. Oh,
I'm a giant. If you're stacking individuals.
Who are you as a scholar? Become the scholar you are.
Scholarship the Musical by Samantha Demerly.
Call back to all of my musical stylings. Well, I know you're not there yet, but do you have any advice for our dear listeners who may be approaching comprehensive exams?
Maybe. I think maybe my advice is more particular to people in a position like me, and it's me appreciating, like I said, how my advisor has been of just like, worry about the thing that's appropriate for you to worry about. If you're stressing about comps year one, or like if you're scared of grad school because you know there's this comprehensive exam, that's reasonable. And as we talked about, I think comps are a natural exit stage. This is what we talked about in like our preparation for this episode. Like it can be a thing where like this is kind of the one check. Is grad school, is this program the right thing for you? I think treat that with the respect it deserves, but I don't know if I needed to be worrying about comps in year one as much as I needed to, right? Like, it's about the coursework, integrating into the department, meeting people to build my committee. How can I think about a comps committee if I don't know as many of the faculty as is appropriate in my department? And so then now that I'm gearing up for comps within a year, it's think about your reading list, refine your dissertation proposal, maybe not specifically, but broadly, like those kinds of things. And then the points you've said about talking to your advisor, but maybe your advisor, for a number of reasons, might not always give you the most specifics. Talk to people who go through it. I think that's such a great piece of advice. Yeah.
Use the community to the extent that you feel comfortable with. I know some cohorts are a little stagnant, and that's totally fair. Other people are going through it too. Like, you know, if you can talk to kind of anyone who's willing to explore that space with you, I think that's going to be useful. If you can get your advisor to give you a decent understanding or a decent expectation of what the comps are going to be, I think that'll be valuable. But also know that you're developing your own ideas, that you don't have to be able to cite and recite perfectly 100 texts that you've read.
It's kind of like your coursework. Like, you don't have to read everything on the syllabus.
Well, and you don't have to read everything on there strategically. Find the scholarship that you think is going to be valuable, skim the rest of it, or like, you know, heavily skim the rest of some of it so that you can get a good sense of where you feel like you fit within that scholarly conversation. If the reading seems overwhelming, do less of it. And then think more. Think more about what you want to say.
Think more, read less.
Think more, read less.
Well, and this is a thing that just came to me. I think part of it too is, yes, success is the standard and the expectation, but part of that is like, you've done 3 years of coursework. You're probably going to succeed. And if you don't, like, there are retake opportunities. Like, not passing comps initially is not the end all be all.
It is not the end of the world. You can take them again, and you can have different strategies for reading the second time around. You know, figure out what's going to make you feel successful.
Revision is a part of life.
Yes, revision is a part of life. Yeah, if you fail your comps, not the end of the world. If you fail your comps and you think maybe this isn't for me, respect, you don't have to continue forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I was told from a couple of graduate students when I was reading my list that, this is the time to get out. And I don't think I took that seriously. I'm still happy where I am, but looking back, there is part of me that was like, what if I had, what if I had quit while I was ahead, as opposed to continuing down this path. I think I would have been still happy. Very different Samantha. Maybe not. Maybe similar Samantha. But
have that life conversation with yourself.
Have that life conversation with yourself. And there's nothing wrong with deciding that these programs or this type of work is not for you. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm really,
and I think a lot of people try and
really respectful of that.
So
also a little jealous of people who are like, yeah, this isn't for me, and they go off and do other things. And I'm like, wow, that's self-understanding.
You just left.
You just did it. I'm so proud of you. Okay. You thought that this was going to be a shorter episode. We're still almost at an hour.
I guess we always got things to say.
We always got things to say. Well, that is it for our discussion of comprehensive exams. Hopefully some element of this was useful to you, whether that be from the retrospective side of myself or from
the preparatory side,
from Nolan. So thank you again for listening. We love you and respect you and hope that reading isn't scary, because sometimes it is. Yeah. Happy reading?
Happy reading.
Happy reading, y'all.
Bye, y'all.